The apartment smelled faintly of coffee, and by morning, something in the air felt different. Marcus sat at the kitchen counter, his laptop glowing in the soft autumn light, pretending not to react when his roommate stepped out of the hallway. For 3 years, Marcus had perfected the art of quiet indifference, the quick glance up, the polite smile, and the immediate return to whatever work he pretended was urgent. His roommate's name was David. David Chen, confident, grounded, and completely unaware that he was the reason Marcus took longer routes home, why he memorized David's schedule, why his entire emotional temperature changed depending on which one of them walked into the kitchen first. "You were up late again," David said, reaching for a mug. Their shoulders almost brushed, and Marcus felt the almost touch like a spark he tried to ignore. "Deadlines," Marcus replied, not quite a lie but not the real truth either. He had stayed up until 2, mostly because David had friends over and Marcus needed their leftover energy to fade before he could finally breathe again. David poured his coffee with the relaxed ease of someone who expected the world to shift around him. He wore the gray Friday shirt, the one that somehow made his eyes look warmer. Marcus had noticed this small detail far too many times. "Working on anything interesting?" David asked, casual but genuinely curious in that effortless way that made everything harder. If only he were distant cold. Instead, he was consistently, impossibly kind. "Just a logo redesign," Marcus said, subtly turning his laptop away. "Nothing special." "What about you?" Marcus asked. "Big day," David said. "I'm going to that networking event at the Botanical Gardens. My company's sponsoring a conservation project, could help with future promotions." He leaned against the counter, calm in a way Marcus never felt around him. "You should come," he added. "They allow +1s, might be good for you to meet people outside your field." There it was again, David's effortless generosity, unaware of the impact it had. He thought Marcus needed more people in his life, when in reality Marcus had built an entire separate orbit just to survive loving someone who would never love him back. Different cafes, different bars, different routines, anything to avoid wanting more than he was allowed. "Thanks, but I've got deadlines," Marcus said. He hated himself for the lie and for the small relief that came with it. "Your loss," David said with a soft smile. "There's leftover pad thai in the fridge if you get hungry. I made too much." After David left, Marcus sat in the silence he had created and tried to focus on work. The logo on his screen, meant to symbolize growth, felt almost ironic. He'd been stuck in the same emotional place for 3 years, repeating the same day over and over. He loved David, quietly, deeply, in that slow way that sneaks up on you until it controls everything. It started as simple admiration for someone honest and present, someone who listened, someone who remembered small details, someone who left thoughtful notes on the fridge about groceries, someone straight. David dated accomplished women Marcus tried hard not to resent. His last relationship ended 6 months ago, and since then he'd walked through life with a calm Marcus found almost unbearable. That evening, Marcus finished the logo, replied to a few emails, and ordered Thai food from a different restaurant, out of stubbornness more than preference. He worked until midnight, then lay in bed listening to the quiet apartment, trying not to picture David at the gardens, confidently discussing conservation while someone new found him charming. Around 2 in the morning, Marcus heard the door open, keys on the table, a soft sigh, footsteps. Then, unexpectedly, the sound stopped right outside his bedroom door. Marcus froze. Through the small gap he saw David's silhouette, unmoving. For a long moment, David simply stood there, lit faintly by the living room glow. Then he reached forward. Marcus couldn't see clearly through the dark, but he heard the soft creak of the door and felt something light drop at the foot of his bed. A moment later, the door eased shut, footsteps retreated, David's bedroom door closed quietly. Only then did Marcus reach forward. His fingers brushed fabric, a jacket left gently, deliberately. David's jacket? The navy one from his company's limited edition line, given only to senior team members. Months ago, Marcus had joked about how exclusive it was, never thinking David heard him. But David had heard. And at 2 in the morning, after a long event, he had apparently decided Marcus should have it. Marcus held the jacket in the dark and felt something shift in him. It was such a small gesture, one David probably didn't think twice about, but to Marcus, it felt like a message in a language he'd been afraid to understand. He brought the jacket to his face, taking in the familiar scent, cedar, warmth, the subtle cologne David used. It was comforting and devastating at the same time. Emotion hit him hard. After years of forcing his feelings into quiet corners, something inside him finally cracked. It was a moment that demanded honesty, and Marcus wasn't sure he was ready for the consequences. He spent the rest of the night with the jacket beside him, not sleeping, not fully awake, suspended in that thin space where impossible things briefly feel within reach. By morning, he knew he had a choice. He could return the jacket casually and keep the safe distance they had always lived behind. Or he could acknowledge the vulnerability that had been growing inside him like a quiet ache. The truth was simple. David's gesture, small as it seemed, had changed something. It made Marcus realize that invisibility only exists when you choose not to be seen, and maybe, after 3 years of hiding, it was time to risk something different. Marcus wore the jacket the next day. It was a deliberate act, subtle but meaningful. He paired it with dark jeans and a fitted Henley, nothing bold, just slightly more intentional than usual. He wore the jacket casually as though it belonged to him. When David emerged from his room that afternoon, Marcus tried to stay calm even as his heart raced. David's eyes caught the jacket instantly. They widened slightly, then softened into something warm, something Marcus wanted desperately to believe meant more. "Oh, you're wearing it," David said, and there was something in his voice that sent a stir of warmth through Marcus. "Looks better on you than I expected." "It's really good quality," Marcus replied, honest but hopelessly inadequate compared to everything he felt. "Thanks for the kindness, unexpected." David paused in the kitchen doorway, studying him with an expression Marcus couldn't easily interpret. "Not random," he said quietly. "I'd been thinking about giving it to you for a while. You mentioned liking it months ago. I guess I finally remembered." It wasn't dramatic, but the small hesitation in David's voice, the uncertainty, was something Marcus had never heard before. It felt like the beginning of something he didn't dare name. Marcus felt something warm expand inside him. "Well, I appreciate it," he said gently, "really." David nodded, then, in a gesture so natural it sent a shock through Marcus, he reached out and adjusted the jacket's collar, his fingers brushing lightly against the back of Marcus's neck. The touch was soft, almost accidental, but Marcus felt it everywhere. "It looks good on you," David repeated, quieter this time, more careful. Then he stepped back, the moment shifting. "I'm heading to the gym, back in a couple hours." After he left, Marcus sat alone, replaying the moment. He was used to doubting himself, used to assuming he imagined things. David was kind to everyone. Maybe he didn't even remember giving the jacket. The small adjustment could have been nothing. But the hesitation, the uncertainty, the way David watched him lately, those were new. The next 3 days settled into a rhythm that felt almost intentional. They spent more time in shared spaces. David's morning coffee began matching Marcus's work time. One evening, David suggested they order dinner together. They watched a film, sitting at opposite ends of the couch, but David stretched his legs toward Marcus's side, close enough to feel deliberate, close enough to feel like an unspoken question. Their conversations deepened too. David began asking about Marcus's childhood, his reasons for choosing design, his relationship with his family, and Marcus found himself opening up more than he ever had before. 5 days after the jacket appeared, David mentioned an exhibition opening at a contemporary art gallery, the exact kind of place Marcus had once said he wanted to visit. "I was thinking of going Saturday," David said carefully, watching Marcus with a tone that made it clear the offer wasn't casual. "Would you want to go, as in together?" Marcus asked before he could stop himself. His heart sped up like he'd accidentally turned a casual moment into a confession. He immediately regretted it until he saw something in David's eyes, something that looked like relief, like he'd needed Marcus to ask. "I'd like it to be," David said slowly, choosing each word with care, as if translating a feeling he was still learning how to express. "If that's what you want too, I don't completely understand what's happening between us yet, but I want to, and I think maybe you do as well." In that moment, Marcus felt his entire internal world rearrange. Every emotional compartment he'd built, every careful boundary, every quiet hope, every denial he'd relied on to survive collapsed. and what remained was terrifying in its simplicity. The possibility that he hadn't been imagining everything. David, Marcus began, then stopped. The distance between what he felt and what he could safely say felt impossible to bridge. He took a breath. I need to ask you something, and I need honesty. Okay, David said. He shifted closer on the couch, open, attentive, present in a way Marcus had only dreamed of. The jacket, Marcus said softly. And the way you've been these past few days, is this about me, or is it about something else, if you're just questioning things about yourself and I'm convenient? You're not convenient, David cut in, his voice sharp with emotion. You're the opposite of convenient. You're the person I wake up thinking about. You're the reason I can't stay focused in half my meetings. He stopped, regrouping. I'm not good at this, I'm not practiced at this, not the way you probably are, but I need you to know this isn't random, and it isn't because you're convenient. Marcus felt the last of his defenses dissolve. I don't know what you mean about me being practiced, he whispered. I've felt invisible to you for 3 years. No, David said, his voice gentle but steady. You weren't invisible, I was blind, that's different, and if I'm being honest, I think I've known something for a while, I just didn't expect to feel this, not for someone I didn't expect to. He breathed out, and that scared me, but I'm tired of being scared, and I'm definitely done being blind. The space between them felt charged, like the entire universe had paused to watch what would happen next. Marcus wanted to ask when David started seeing him what had shifted, what this meant, but David reached out and took his hand. That simple, quiet contact answered every question Marcus had been too afraid to voice. Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, the kind that felt like a gift. Marcus found himself hyper-aware of everything. The way David held the gallery door open, the small touches when they walked side by side, the warmth of his presence as they wandered through rooms filled with bold, complicated art. They stopped in front of a painting, an abstract piece full of motion and stillness. This reminds me of us, David said softly, so quietly Marcus almost missed it. How, Marcus asked, though he already felt the meaning settling inside him. Like two things that seem separate, David said, but are really part of the same composition. You're the stillness, I'm the motion, but we're in the same frame. If anyone else had said it, Marcus would have thought it sounded pretentious. But from David, it felt like poetry, imperfect, sincere, true. After the gallery, they drifted through the city with no destination. Their conversation shifted from serious to playful and back again. David shared childhood memories Marcus had never heard, despite living together for 3 years. Marcus opened up about things he'd kept hidden, small truths he'd saved for someday. By the time they reached a quiet cafe, evening had settled over the city. They ordered coffee they didn't really want, just an excuse to stay in the warm light a little longer. I want to tell you something, David said, tracing the rim of his cup. It might sound sudden, but my feelings have been catching up to something my mind figured out weeks ago. Marcus waited, holding his breath. I'm in love with you, David said quietly. I think I have been for a while, I just didn't have the language for it, and that wasn't fair to you, but this isn't an experiment. This is me choosing a direction for my life, and that direction is toward you. The words landed deep inside Marcus, breaking open a space he hadn't let himself touch for 3 years. He reached across the table, resting his hand over David's. I love you too, Marcus said. I've been in love with you, and I convinced myself I was invisible, because the alternative was losing you, but maybe I wasn't invisible, maybe you were just afraid, and maybe I was too. So what now? David asked, his eyes unguarded for the first time, vulnerable, hopeful. Now, Marcus said softly, we stop being invisible to each other, now we build something real. David smiled, one of those soft, genuine smiles that seemed to warm the whole room. Marcus thought it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. 2 weeks into something that still didn't have a name but felt like transformation, Marcus woke to find David already up, sitting on the edge of the bed with morning coffee, looking younger, uncertain, and impossibly endearing in the soft light. Hi, David said, awkwardly, something he rarely was anymore. In the past 2 weeks, he'd carried himself with surprising clarity, as if he'd finally found something he didn't know he'd been missing. I want to talk about something, David said, And I don't know how to start, so I'm just going to start badly and hope it gets better. Marcus sat up, took the coffee, and tried to read the expression on David's face. Okay, I'm awake now, mostly, Marcus said, rubbing his eyes. What's going on? I told my parents about us, David said quietly, watching Marcus's reaction with careful attention. I know we never talked about timelines, and I probably should have asked if you wanted to be involved in that conversation, but I was at Sunday dinner and my mom kept asking why I seemed different, and he exhaled. I told them about you, about us. Marcus felt something shift deep in his chest. Not fear, exactly, more like the weight of something becoming real in a way it hadn't been before. This was the moment where their private universe extended into the world outside the apartment, the moment where invisibility wasn't an option anymore. How did they take it? Marcus asked, careful, steady. My dad cried, David said, his voice thickening. Not sad tears. He said he'd been waiting for me to find something that made me see the world differently, and he was happy it was a person happy that person made me happy. Marcus swallowed hard. And my mom, David continued, she went straight into practical mode, asking how serious we were, whether we'd met before romantically, the usual mom interrogation. You told them my name, Marcus asked. It wasn't the most important question, but it was the one that lodged itself in his nerves. I told them everything, David said simply. That you live here, that I've had feelings for a while, that you're brilliant and kind, and that I'm completely in love with you. I told them because I'm tired of dividing my life into pieces. And because I want this to be real, Marcus, public. I want you to be my person, not just the person I see when I close the apartment door. Marcus set the coffee aside and pulled David down beside him. David went willingly, fitting against him with a kind of natural ease that still startled Marcus even after 2 weeks. It felt impossible that David's body could align with his, as if they'd been shaped with each other in mind. I'm scared, Marcus whispered, burying his face against David's shoulder. I built my emotional life around invisibility, and now you want me to be seen, and I'm terrified I'm going to disappoint you. That's the beautiful part, David murmured, tracing small patterns on Marcus's shoulder. I already know you, I've already met the person I love, I'm not waiting for some perfect version of you to appear. Over the next several weeks, visibility took shape in ways both ordinary and profound. David introduced Marcus to his parents with a kind of quiet pride that nearly unmade him. David's mother turned out to be not just accepting but enthusiastically welcoming, cooking elaborate meals for the boys, as she called them. David's father, gentle and soft-spoken, pulled Marcus aside to tell him stories from David's childhood, the kind of stories that made Marcus understand exactly where David's kindness came from. Marcus, in turn, introduced David to his own family with more vulnerability than he'd ever allowed himself before. His parents, who had suspected for years but honored his need for privacy, welcomed David with warmth that felt like a soft landing. His mother and David discovered a shared interest in gardening, sparking long conversations about soil composition and planting schedules. His father taught David to play chess, and soon their family dinners included a quiet, intense match in the corner of the living room. But the most profound changes happened at home. The boundaries Marcus had built for survival began to dissolve. They shared space differently now, intimately, naturally, not just physically, though that had deepened too in a warm, slow-burning way Marcus had once only dreamed of. They shared emotional space, honest conversations at midnight, gentle truths that didn't need translating, silent comfort that didn't need words. One night 6 weeks in, Marcus woke at 3 a.m. to find the bed empty. He slipped on a shirt and went looking. He found David standing in the kitchen, the city lights casting soft shadows across his face. Bad dream, Marcus whispered, stepping beside him. No, David said, wrapping an arm around Marcus's waist, just thinking. About what? Do you remember when I gave you the jacket? David asked. Every detail, Marcus said, because it was true. It had been the first breach in his carefully guarded world. I want to tell you what it actually meant, David said quietly. I'd been lying awake for weeks wondering if I was imagining everything between us. You were my roommate and I didn't want to ruin the one good constant in my life. But then you said you liked the jacket and it felt like the universe nudging me. Like giving it to you would be a way of asking if you wanted me closer. I did want it, Marcus admitted, I wanted it so badly I was terrified of what it meant. And now, David asked, turning to face him fully. Now, Marcus said, voice soft but sure, I don't know how I survived being invisible to someone I love this much. It was like living in monochrome, and now everything has color. David kissed him gently, deeply, with a tenderness that felt like sunrise, a promise, the end of a long darkness. 3 months after the jacket first appeared at the foot of Marcus's bed, David came home holding a folder. We should renew the lease, he said, together officially. It wasn't a traditional proposal, but it felt like one, a commitment not born from convenience or routine but from choice. A choice to build something with intention. With clarity. With love. I want this to be deliberate, David said, offering the papers with hands that didn't tremble. I want us to choose each other on purpose. Marcus would spend the rest of his life grateful for the day his straight roommate had finally seen him. Not the version he tried to be. Not the quiet shadow he'd perfected. But him, the full, unhidden, unedited truth. As the music swelled around them, David tightened his arm around Marcus's waist as though anchoring him to something real, something permanent. The lights in the garden twinkled overhead, reflecting off the simple ring on Marcus's hand, an ordinary object that now felt like a promise carved into every part of his future. You okay? David murmured against his ear. Marcus nodded, a soft laugh escaping him. More than okay, I feel visible. David smiled, brushing their foreheads together. You always were, you just finally believe it. They kept dancing, slow, unhurried, completely synchronized in a way that only came from two people who had learned each other's rhythms long before they'd learned to name their feelings. Across the garden, their families watched with expressions that held a lifetime's worth of relief and pride. David's father wiped away tears openly. Marcus's mother pressed a hand to her heart as if she were holding something precious in place. Friends stood in clusters, smiling at the sight, finally understanding what the years of subtle glances and unspoken tension had meant. Later, when the night softened and guests drifted home, Marcus and David lingered in the quiet glow of the string lights. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, the same scent Marcus remembered from the night David had first slipped that jacket across his bed, a gesture so small it could have been missed entirely, yet big enough to shift the course of their lives. Do you ever think about how easily we could have missed this? Marcus asked. David leaned back against him, warm and solid. No, he said, because I think we found it exactly when we were ready to. He paused, then added with a smile Marcus could feel without seeing, you were never invisible to me, you were just waiting. For what? For someone to prove you didn't have to hide. Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of the years he'd spent shrinking himself, carefully curating every angle of his heart. He thought of the moment David had looked at him, really looked, and something in the universe had shifted just enough for courage to slip in. Years from now, when people asked how they fell in love, they'd talk about that jacket, about kindness at 2 a.m, about long silences filled with possibilities neither of them could name yet, about a man brave enough to tell his parents the truth and another brave enough to let himself be seen. But for now, as David's fingers laced with his and the world narrowed into a soft, perfect moment, Marcus simply thought. Visibility isn't frightening anymore. Because he's the one who found me in the dark. And I'm not going back to shadows ever again. Together they stepped into the rest of their life, not invisible, not hiding. But chosen. Seen. And finally beautifully real.